I still remember the day the invitation arrived, not for me, but for everyone else. It was printed on thick ivory paper with gold edges, sealed in a white envelope that smelled faintly of roses and pride. My cousin Emma's wedding, the grand event my entire family had been talking about for months. Everyone got an invitation. Everyone except me. At first, I thought it was a mistake. Maybe mine got lost in the mail, or maybe Emma had forgotten to send it. We'd grown up together, after all. We shared secrets, birthdays, tears. I even helped her pick the dress for her first date with Ryan, the same man she was now marrying. But as the days passed, I realized it wasn't a mistake. It was deliberate. I heard the whispers before I saw the truth. My aunt mentioned casually that some people weren't invited because Emma wanted a smaller, more peaceful ceremony. Then a friend from college, who barely knew Emma, posted her invitation on social media with the caption, "Can't wait for this beautiful wedding." That's when the sting began to burn. I sat in my small apartment, the phone screen glowing in the dark, and I felt something deep inside me crack. Not from jealousy, no, that would have been too easy. It was betrayal, a quiet, deliberate exclusion that spoke louder than any argument. I had been erased from a celebration I once helped dream about. I tried calling her. Once, twice, 3 times. No answer. I messaged her asking if I'd done something wrong, but the message stayed unread for days. Until finally, she replied with a single line that would echo in my head for weeks. "I just think it's better this way." No drama. No drama. As if my very presence was chaos. As if I was a problem to be managed. I didn't cry that night. I just sat there replaying every memory, every favor, every laugh we'd shared. I thought of how I'd stood by her when Ryan cheated 2 years ago, how I kept her secret, how I told her she deserved better. And now she was marrying him and cutting me out as if I was the stain on her perfect white dress. My mother tried to console me, saying maybe Emma was just overwhelmed, but I could see the pity in her eyes. She knew, everyone knew. The family group chat buzzed with excitement, hotel bookings, outfits, travel plans, and my name was never mentioned once. I decided I wouldn't ask again. Sometimes silence speaks louder than confrontation. But silence can also become your greatest weapon if you know how to use it. I told myself I wouldn't break. I wouldn't beg to be included in a place where I was unwanted. But deep down, I made a quiet promise. They might have excluded me from the wedding, but they wouldn't erase me from the story. I would write my own part, not with noise or drama, but with patience, quiet, firm, controlled. They wouldn't even see it coming. The night before the family flew out for the wedding, I stayed awake scrolling through photos, the rehearsal dinner, the dresses, the flowers, every picture like a knife twisted gently. But instead of bleeding, I began to feel something new rising in me, purpose. I realized that revenge doesn't always roar. Sometimes it whispers. Sometimes it wears a smile. And sometimes it waits until the perfect moment to step into the light and make everyone question the story they thought they knew. That night, under the soft glow of my bedside lamp, I wrote something in my journal. They excluded me from the wedding, but I'll make sure they never forget my name. And as the ink dried on the page, I knew the story wasn't over. It was just beginning. The days after I discovered I was uninvited felt like walking through a town where everyone else had the map and I was the only one lost. And with each passing text full of excited emojis and lipstick heart photos, my sense of being invisible grew heavier. But the ache shifted into a quiet curiosity that felt almost useful. I started paying attention to things I'd once let slide, small details. The way Emma's tone changed when she talked about Ryan. The slight hesitation in my aunt's voice when she asked about my plans for the weekend. The way my cousin Sophia avoided looking at me in group photos as if she were trying not to catch anything. Contagious from my expression, and that curiosity turned into a quieter hunger to understand why I had been cut out. Because exclusion without reason felt like a story missing its motive, and stories without motives are puzzles worth solving. I began to retrace the last year like a detective of my own life, scanning memories for any moment that could justify such coldness. The dinner where I laughed too loudly at an old joke. The time I told Emma the truth when she asked if Ryan had been honest. The birthday I missed because of work. None of them should have been cause for exile. Yet I kept digging, and what I found shifted the ground beneath my feet in a way I hadn't expected. A mutual friend, Jules, messaged me one evening with a subject line that read simply, "We need to talk." And when we met at a coffee shop that smelled of cinnamon and something expensive, she slid her sunglasses off like a curtain being pulled back and said Ryan and Emma thought I'd been spreading something about Ryan's past, a rumor. A story that painted him in a bad light, and that Emma had decided the cleanest way to protect her new life was to cut out anyone who could complicate it. I felt my face go numb, because the thing Jules mentioned, the rumor, had actually been something else entirely, months earlier. In a moment of anger and honesty, I'd told Emma a truth she hadn't wanted to hear about Ryan's history with a business partner who'd been ruined by him. I told it because she asked, because I thought honesty between us was sacred, not because I wanted to ruin her. But somewhere along the line, the truth had been transformed into a weapon, and I was the one holding the label dangerous, as if I had chosen to hurt her. I asked Jules, who started the story, who had decided to twist what I said into something ugly, and she hesitated, then named a face I didn't expect. Sophia, my cousin. The one who had always seemed so sweet, the one at my side during childhood sleepovers. The one who now smiled a little too brightly in family videos. I remember the moment like a snapshot that hurts. Jules said Sophia had told Emma that I'd been talking to people about Ryan's past, inflating details, making him look worse to justify my absence from his life. That Sophia had wrapped the gossip in concern, the kind that sounds like protection but lands like a verdict. Why would Sophia do that? I wanted to believe it was a misunderstanding, a miscommunication, but the more I thought about it, the more the little things I'd chalked up to chance began to arrange themselves into a pattern. Sophia's sudden interest in wedding planning, her repeated mentions of how this wedding should be perfect, how some people complicate things, the way she'd started following Ryan on social media and liked every sponsored post the week Emma announced the engagement, and it stung like betrayal because Sophia had been my ally once. But alliances change like the seasons, and sometimes people you loved become the architects of your silence. I confronted Sophia the night I found the courage, in the kind of confrontation that starts calm and then becomes a monsoon. We met at the park where we'd once played as kids, the swings creaking behind us like old laughter, and I asked her directly, "Did you tell Emma I was spreading things about Ryan?" She looked at me with that same smile that masked something colder and said, "I only told her what I heard." You know how protective she is. Protective, I thought, not honest. I pushed harder, because that was all I knew how to do, push, until the truth shifted, and she finally admitted with the barest shrug that she'd been worried about the family's image, about a scandal on the day of the wedding, and she'd said what she thought would keep the peace. Her voice was small, as if she were apologizing to the world, but it sounded like justification to me. The realization that someone I trusted could decide my fate in a sentence made my hands tremble, but underneath the tremor there was also something else: clarity. Betrayal is a blade that cuts two ways. It wounds you, but it also reveals the shape of the people who wield it. I left that park with a list forming in my head: people to talk to, pieces of evidence to gather, moments to remember, and a plan that felt less like revenge and more like reassertion. I would not beg Emma to let me in. Instead, I would show the truth in a way that couldn't be dismissed as bitterness. I started small, because grand gestures become stories you can accuse someone of writing. I gathered messages, screenshots of conversations where Sophia casually dropped hints that I was too dramatic, times when she had whispered about keeping things clean. I revisited old group chats, archived emails, even a voicemail where Emma had asked me to be calm about a fight. And in each place I found splinters of a narrative that had been built without my consent. It was meticulous work, like piecing together a photograph from shreds, and with each piece I felt more solid, like a house repaired brick by careful brick. But this wasn't only about proving Sophia wrong. It was about reclaiming my dignity, about showing Emma that excluding me wasn't protection. It was cowardice disguised as calm. I also reached out to a few family members who weren't so swept up in the wedding: Euphoria, an uncle who had always been fond of me, an old neighbor who ran into Emma sometimes and quietly asked questions, listened to answers that sometimes soothed and sometimes cut deeper. One answer surprised me the most. Emma had been convinced by one private message, a single note from Sophia, that I was unstable, that I liked drama, that including me would bring a scene to the altar. A single message. I pictured that message like a match dropped in a dry room. One small flame, and suddenly everything caught. In those weeks of quiet investigation, I also began to notice something else. Being excluded gave me time I hadn't had before, the time to think, to hold my anger like a clay pot and shape it until it meant something beyond pain. I gave myself space to be strategic instead of spiteful, to plan instead of panic. I rehearsed conversations in my head where I spoke calmly and clearly, not with the heat of accusation, but the coolness of fact. I imagined showing Emma the evidence not as an ambush but as a mirror, a chance for her to see what she had been told and what she had accepted. And while I gathered proof, I also tended to myself in ways I'd neglected: sleeping, exercising, answering emails at work with the kind of focus that reminded me I had sources of worth beyond a single family's approval. It began to feel less like plotting and more like reclaiming my life. Still, even as I worked, there were nights when doubt crept in like fog, when I wondered if I was mistaken, if maybe I had been too blunt, if perhaps the world saw me as Emma now did an unnecessary storm, and if any proof I gathered would matter to someone who had already decided. Those uncertainties were the dangerous ones because they could erode resolve. So I made myself a promise: no theatrics, no public shaming, no loud accusations that would make me look petty. I would act quietly, firmly, and with a patience that would make them underestimate me. This was not about making them feel small. It was about making them see that excluding me didn't protect their happiness, it hollowed it out. The plan was beginning to take shape like the blueprint of a house: gather evidence, find allies who cared about truth more than appearances, give Emma a choice to look at reality before it was handed to her in a way she couldn't ignore. I told myself to move slowly, like someone assembling a clock, because timing would be everything. One wrong beat, and the whole mechanism would freeze. As the wedding date drew closer, I felt the pressure of the approaching day like the hush before an orchestra begins, and I knew that whatever I did next would have to be precise. I had ignited a quiet fire within me, not the kind that destroys without thought, but the kind that warms a room and reveals the shadows. And in those revealing moments, I promised myself I'd be ready to step out of the shadows and let the truth have its turn in the light. The week of the wedding arrived wrapped in silk and silence. Every family chat full of excitement and emojis that I scrolled past without responding. Every post like a reminder that I'd been replaced by a convenient fiction. Yet beneath that stillness, I was more alive than I had been in months, because the plan that had once felt fragile now stood solid in my mind. It started with a message I sent to Emma, not confrontational, not emotional, just a gentle note saying I wished her the best for her big day and that I hoped she was surrounded by love. I knew she wouldn't reply, but I also knew she'd read it. It wasn't bait. It was a mirror, subtle and disarming. People always underestimate quietness. While she celebrated rehearsals, fittings, and final preparations, I continued my careful collection. I reached out to an old colleague of Ryan's, a man named Derek, who had once worked with him before their partnership ended in an ugly split. Derek was hesitant at first, but after a few cups of coffee and a promise I wouldn't drag his name into drama, he opened up. He told me stories about how Ryan had cut corners, about the clients he'd misled, about a deal he'd stolen credit for, all the things I had once told Emma but she refused to believe. Derek even showed me an email exchange that hinted at a pattern of deceit, nothing scandalous enough for public ruin, but enough to show character. I didn't plan to expose him online or make it a spectacle. No, I wanted Emma to see the truth from the very source she trusted least me. I kept every message, every screenshot, every timestamp in a clean folder on my laptop labeled Notes, a simple name for something that could dismantle an illusion. A few days before the wedding, while everyone was busy traveling to the venue, I sent a polite message to Sophia. "I hope the wedding is everything you dreamed of," I wrote, attaching a small picture of us as kids sitting on the swings, the same park where she had lied to my face weeks earlier. She saw it instantly but didn't respond. That silence told me everything. It meant she felt the unease I wanted her to feel, the kind that grows in the space between guilt and fear. I wasn't out to destroy her. I wanted her to think about what she'd done, to sit with it, to watch the reflection of her choices shimmer in her mind when she smiled for the wedding photos. Meanwhile, I contacted my cousin Daniel, one of the few who had quietly messaged me to say he thought what happened was wrong. Daniel had always been a mediator, someone who believed in fairness. I told him I needed a small favor, to pass along a USB drive to Emma on the morning of the wedding, no questions asked. He hesitated but agreed. He didn't need to know what was inside. He just needed to trust me. On that drive, I placed everything: screenshots, messages, Derek's emails, even the old voice notes Emma had sent me when she doubted Ryan's honesty. But I also added something else, a letter. It wasn't an attack. It was a reflection written in my own hand, in calm sentences that carried no venom, only truth. I didn't want to ruin your happiness, I wrote. I just wanted to be remembered for what I truly was, a friend who told you the truth, not an enemy who spread lies. You cut me out to protect your peace, but sometimes peace built on lies breaks louder than any truth ever could. I sealed it digitally, named it For You, and placed it on the drive. The night before the wedding, I went for a long walk through the city. It was late, the air soft with the hum of distant music and car headlights glinting like brief memories. I walked past stores, cafes, laughter spilling from open doors, and I thought about how strange it was that something as sacred as a wedding could become the stage for quiet revenge. I didn't hate Emma. I pitied her. Because love built on illusion isn't love, it's theater. I went home, made tea, and sat by the window watching the streetlights shimmer on wet pavement. My mind was calm, my heartbeat steady. There was no chaos in me anymore, only purpose. The next morning, as the family flooded social media with photos of the bright ceremony, the flowers, the aisle, the lace that shimmered like frost, I knew Daniel had done his part. Around noon, he sent a short message. She got it. That was all I needed to know. I imagined her face when she opened the folder, the stillness before recognition, the way her eyes might dart from one screenshot to the next. I imagined her reading my letter and realizing the story she'd been told about me wasn't the truth. It was convenient fiction spun by someone who wanted the spotlight clean. And maybe she'd look at Ryan, her soon-to-be husband, with that new flicker of uncertainty that comes when trust begins to tremble. I didn't wish for her wedding to crumble, not really. I just wanted her to see the cost of erasing someone's honesty to protect someone else's lie. That night, after the ceremony ended, the family group chat went strangely quiet. Photos trickled in slower than usual. Sophia hadn't posted a single picture all day. My aunt, usually overflowing with joy, sent only a polite thank you note to the group. I didn't ask what happened. I didn't need to. Silence has its own language, and I've learned to speak it fluently. 2 days later, Emma called. I didn't answer the first time. The second time, I let it ring twice before I picked up. Her voice was soft, trembling, not angry, but uncertain. You could have just told me, she said. I smiled faintly, though she couldn't see it. I did, I replied. You just didn't want to listen. She was quiet for a long time, the kind of quiet that isn't empty but heavy. Finally, she whispered, "I'm sorry." I didn't rush to forgive her. I just said, "I hope you're happy," and ended the call. Because forgiveness isn't always words. Sometimes it's the peace of knowing you acted with integrity when others didn't. Over the next few weeks, I learned through whispers that the honeymoon had been postponed, that there had been complications. I didn't need to pry. My role was done. I had turned the tables quietly, firmly, without raising my voice or throwing a stone. I let truth do the speaking. But what surprised me wasn't Emma's apology, it was Sophia's silence. Not a word, not a message, not even a comment under a photo. She disappeared from social media, like a ghost retreating from the scene she created. I thought about reaching out, but then I realized I didn't owe her my comfort. Some lessons are learned only in solitude. That was the moment I finally exhaled, as if months of tightness had loosened in my chest. The revenge wasn't about destruction, it was about reclamation. And I had reclaimed everything that mattered, my self-respect, my voice, my calm. The days that followed her call felt oddly quiet, like the air after a long storm when the streets still glisten and everything smells faintly of rain and dust. A peace that's fragile but real. I hadn't expected the silence to feel so complete. My phone no longer buzzed with family chatter, no new photos appeared in the group chat, and even Sophia's perfect little circle of friends had gone still online. It was as if everyone had agreed, without saying it, that something had cracked at the wedding, something invisible but undeniable. I didn't need the details. I could feel it in the way the energy shifted. People who used to look past me now looked at me longer, like they were trying to figure out what I knew. When my mother called me 3 days later, her tone was hesitant, measured, like someone stepping carefully across glass. "Emma told me she spoke to you," she said, and I answered simply, "Yes, she did." There was a pause. She's having a hard time right now." I didn't ask why. I didn't want to feed my satisfaction too openly. But inside, I felt something settle, a sense of balance restored, not through destruction, but through truth being quietly unveiled. A few days later, I went to visit my mother for dinner. She hugged me tighter than usual, and during the meal, she mentioned how the family was trying to recover from some unexpected drama at the wedding. Apparently, after the ceremony, Emma had confronted Ryan privately about some of the emails on the USB. He had tried to explain, to dismiss them as old misunderstandings, but the seed of doubt had already been planted. Family members overheard raised voices, saw Emma leave the reception early, and by the end of the night, whispers had spread faster than the music could drown them. No one blamed me directly, but everyone knew I had somehow been part of the revelation. My mother looked at me and said quietly, "You didn't have to go that far." I smiled faintly and answered, "I didn't go far at all, Mom. I just told the truth." And for the first time, she didn't argue. She just sighed and said, "Sometimes the truth costs more than lies." I nodded. Yes, but it lasts longer too. Later that night, as I sat in my childhood bedroom, surrounded by the remnants of a past I'd outgrown, I reflected on how strange justice can be. It doesn't always arrive with fanfare. Sometimes it slips in through the side door, gentle and patient, and sits beside you while the rest of the world catches up. I realized I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't even proud. I was just free. The next morning, an envelope arrived at my apartment. Inside was a handwritten letter from Emma. Her handwriting was shaky, the lines uneven, as if she had written it in a rush of emotion. "You were right," it began. "About him. About everything. I don't know if the wedding can be undone, but at least now I can see clearly. I owe you an apology I can't put into words. I let fear and pride make me believe the wrong people." She went on to say that she'd confronted Sophia too, and that Sophia had finally admitted to twisting my words to protect her own position in the family. "I thought she was helping me," Emma wrote, "but she was helping herself look better." Reading those words was like watching the curtain finally fall on a play I'd been forced to watch from the audience. I didn't cry. I just folded the letter neatly and placed it in my journal next to the first entry I'd written months earlier, the one that said, "They excluded me from the wedding, but I'll make sure they never forget my name." I smiled, not from pride, but from a sense of completion. The circle had closed. A week later, Emma asked if she could see me. I agreed, mostly out of curiosity. We met at a quiet cafe downtown, the kind with dim lighting and soft jazz playing in the background. When she walked in, she looked different, tired, but also softer, like someone who had finally stopped pretending. She hugged me before sitting down. "I don't expect you to forgive me," she said, "but I need you to know I see now what you tried to do." I nodded. "You don't need to explain." "I want to," she said quickly. I was scared. I thought if I questioned Ryan, everything would fall apart. "I thought you were jealous or trying to make things messy. But you were the only one being honest with me." Her voice cracked a little on that last sentence, and for a moment I saw the cousin I used to know, the one who'd shared secrets under blankets, who'd laughed until she cried. "I didn't want to hurt you," she whispered. "I just didn't want to believe you." I took a breath, steady and quiet. "Sometimes believing the truth hurts more than ignoring it," I said. "But at least now you know which one lasts." She nodded slowly, tears glistening but not falling. We talked for a while about the wedding, the fallout, how Ryan had left to stay with a friend for a few days, how the family was whispering but not confronting anyone directly. "Sophia won't answer my calls," she said. "She come around," I replied. "Guilt has a way of knocking eventually." When we left the cafe, she squeezed my hand and said, "Thank you for not screaming." I smiled softly. "Revenge doesn't need to be loud," I said. "Sometimes silence does the work." As I watched her walk away, I felt something close gently inside me. The chapter, the ache, the endless need to be seen. I had been erased from her story once, but I had rewritten it without shouting. I had shown that dignity can be the sharpest weapon. That evening, I went home and looked at my reflection in the mirror. For the first time in months, I saw peace instead of anger. My eyes weren't heavy anymore. My smile wasn't forced. I realized then that true power isn't in making someone pay, it's in knowing you could and choosing a quieter path instead. I thought back to the night I wrote that promise in my journal and whispered softly to myself, "You did it." Not out of arrogance, but relief. And as I closed the notebook, I knew this story had taught me something I'd never forget. Revenge isn't about destruction, it's about restoration, about reclaiming the truth others tried to bury. Sometimes the best way to turn the tables isn't to flip them in anger, but to rearrange them in silence until everyone realizes where they truly belong. It's been months since that day in the cafe, and sometimes I still wake up thinking about how a single invitation or the lack of one changed everything. Not just the relationships, but the way I see people, the way I see myself. Life has a strange way of teaching you through heartbreak, and betrayal, I've learned, is one of its most precise teachers. The family eventually settled back into a quiet rhythm, though the air never felt the same. Emma moved back into her apartment alone after the separation, and while she kept most of it private, I could tell through her tone and silence that she had chosen peace over pretense. I didn't gloat, not once. I sent her a small bouquet of white lily with a simple note that read, "For new beginnings." She replied with a heart emoji, and that was enough. We spoke occasionally after that, not as closely as before, but with a kind of honesty that didn't need decoration. The strange part was Sophia. She didn't reach out for nearly 2 months. Then one evening, as I was leaving work, I saw her standing by the entrance of the building, clutching a small paper bag like it was an apology wrapped in brown paper. She looked smaller somehow, like the weight of her choices had finally caught up. "I didn't know where else to find you," she said softly. I didn't answer right away. She took a step closer. "I messed up. I thought I was helping Emma. I thought if I made you look like the problem, she'd trust me more. But all I did was ruin everything." Her voice trembled. "I'm sorry." I watched her for a moment, the same cousin who once braided my hair before school, the one who'd turned my honesty into ammunition. And yet, in that moment, I didn't feel anger anymore. Just understanding. "You let fear make your decisions," I said quietly. "I get it. But fear always leaves a mess behind." She nodded, tears filling her eyes. "Can we start over?" I smiled faintly. "We can start from truth," I said. "That's all I ask." She reached out hesitantly, and I hugged her, not because she deserved it right away, but because forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting. It means choosing peace over poison. We stood there for a long time in the soft glow of the streetlights, and for the first time since everything began, I felt the last traces of bitterness fade away. In the weeks that followed, life began to move forward in ways I hadn't expected. I got a promotion at work, started new projects, and found comfort in the small routines that once felt dull but now felt like freedom. The exclusion that once broke me had become the doorway to rediscovering my strength. I realized that sometimes people exclude you not because you're wrong, but because your truth makes them uncomfortable. And when that happens, your silence can become your loudest reply. One afternoon, while organizing my bookshelf, I found my old journal again. The pages had softened, the ink a little faded, but the words were still there, raw and real. I flipped to the last entry and wrote something new beneath it. "Peace is not given, it's chosen. Revenge fades, but dignity stays." As I closed the book, I felt a quiet pride, not the kind that boasts, but the kind that breathes. I didn't destroy anyone. I didn't scream, post, or expose. I simply showed them that truth doesn't need to shout to be heard. The people who tried to erase me had written me into their memories instead. Now, when I attend family gatherings smaller, more subdued, with laughter that carries a note of caution, no one dares to treat me as invisible. They greet me with warmth, some with guilt, but mostly with respect. Even my aunt, who once avoided eye contact, now hugs me tightly and whispers, "You've grown stronger." I smile and tell her, "I just learned to stay quiet until the right moment." The lesson of that year became the foundation of everything I now believe. Silence isn't weakness. It's strategy. Patience isn't surrender. It's power. And revenge isn't always fire, it can be light. When I think back to that first night, sitting in my apartment with the invitation everyone else received but me, I realized that being excluded was the best thing that ever happened to me, because it showed me who I was when no one else was clapping, who I became when no one believed me. It taught me that dignity doesn't come from being invited. It comes from knowing you don't need to be. And now, when people ask me how I managed to stay calm through it all, I just smile and say, sometimes the best way to turn the tables is to let them think you're not even at the table. They laugh, thinking it's a joke, but I know the truth behind it. Life will always have people who exclude, manipulate, and lie to protect their comfort. But I've learned that the real victory isn't in revenge. It's in rising so quietly that your peace becomes louder than their betrayal. I don't know what happened to Ryan after that. Maybe he learned something, maybe he didn't, but it doesn't matter anymore. Because the ending wasn't about him. It was about me finding my strength, my calm, my place. I wasn't just excluded from a wedding. I was freed from a story that didn't deserve me. And in that freedom, I found something far better than revenge. I found peace. They say time heals everything, but I've learned it doesn't really heal, it reveals. It shows you who mattered, who never did, and who was just passing through the chapters of your life disguised as forever. When I look back now at everything that happened, the wedding, the silence, the humiliation, the quiet revenge, I don't feel bitterness anymore. I feel clarity. Sometimes the people you love the most are the ones who teach you the hardest truths. I remember standing in front of the mirror one morning, brushing my hair and catching my reflection in the soft light. For a moment, I didn't recognize myself. I looked calmer, older maybe, but stronger. The kind of strength that comes not from winning, but from surviving with your heart intact. I whispered to my reflection, "You made it." And that simple truth felt more powerful than any apology I never received. The world around me moved on, but I had changed permanently. It's funny when you go through betrayal, people tell you to move on quickly, forgive fast, smile, and forget. But no one talks about the quiet nights when you lie awake, replaying conversations, wondering what you missed, what you did wrong. I used to ask those questions too, over and over. But now I know I didn't do anything wrong. I was just honest in a world that rewards convenience over truth. That realization changed everything. It gave me the freedom to stop explaining myself, to stop chasing closure from people who weren't capable of giving it. The best closure I learned is living a life that doesn't revolve around their version of your story. Some weeks after everything settled, I went for a walk in the park where Emma and I used to sit and talk about dreams, plans, and futures that now belong to the past. The trees were shedding their leaves, the air was crisp, and children were laughing in the distance. I sat on a bench and closed my eyes. For the first time, I didn't feel like I'd lost anything. I'd simply been redirected. Life had quietly removed the people who couldn't walk with me into the next chapter, and that was its way of protecting me. I smiled to myself, thinking how strange it was that the pain that once felt unbearable had turned into gratitude. If I hadn't been excluded, I would have never learned how strong silence could be. I would have never learned that revenge doesn't always need destruction. Sometimes it's simply becoming untouchable. The night before Emma left for her new job abroad, she sent me one last message. "Thank you for not destroying me when you had every reason to." I stared at that message for a long time before replying. I didn't need to. The truth did it for me. I didn't mean it cruelly. I meant it honestly. Because that's what betrayal does. It collapses under the weight of its own lies. All you have to do is stay still long enough to let it. Sometimes, silence is the loudest justice. Now, when I pass by wedding stores or see pictures of smiling brides, I don't feel the ache I once did. I feel peace. I smile wishing them joy because I know what joy truly costs and what peace is worth. The girl who once cried over not being invited has now built a life so full she doesn't wait for invitations anymore. She creates her own moments, her own tables, her own celebrations. I host dinners with people who see me, who don't need to compete or pretend. There's laughter, music, and warmth. It's small but real, and that's all I ever wanted. Life taught me that sometimes being left out is a blessing in disguise. It's the universe's way of clearing your path from those who were never meant to walk beside you. I don't chase explanations anymore. I don't seek apologies. I just listen to my peace, and it tells me everything I need to know. When I tell this story now, people often ask, "Don't you wish you could go back and change what happened?" And I always say no. Because if I did, I'd lose the version of myself that I found in the aftermath. The one who learned that quiet doesn't mean weak, that walking away isn't surrender, and that sometimes turning the tables doesn't require noise, it just requires grace. So here I am, stronger, softer, wiser. The woman who was excluded from the wedding, but included in her own rebirth. And if you're listening to this, maybe you've been there too, pushed aside, misunderstood, replaced, or betrayed. If so, let me tell you this. You don't need to fight loudly. You don't need to prove them wrong. You just need to rise so gracefully that one day they'll whisper your name not in guilt, not in envy, but in quiet awe of how you survived. Because that's the real victory. Not revenge, not power, but peace. And sometimes peace is the most poetic revenge of all.